A dying billionaire's final request, a nurse to pretend to be his daughter. Before we begin the story, please leave a comment letting us know where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Rachel Miller was a dedicated nurse, the one person in her family who kept everything together. At 28, she had already been working in a private hospital for 3 years. While she loved helping people, the long hours and overwhelming workload often drained her. Rachel was the primary breadwinner for her family. Her mother, who was sick with a chronic condition, and her younger brother, who was still in school and had just become a father himself. Life hadn't been easy for Rachel. Each month, she barely managed to stretch her paycheck to cover the rent, utilities, and her mother's medical bills. Her small apartment in the city was a far cry from the comfort she longed to offer her family. She was often exhausted, yet there was no choice but to keep going. Rachel didn't have the luxury of feeling sorry for herself. She had responsibilities that left her little time for rest or self-care. As she made her way home from a particularly exhausting night shift, Rachel's phone buzzed. It was a call from her mother. "Rachel, my child, is everything okay?" Her mother's voice was soft with a hint of worry. Rachel smiled despite the fatigue. "I'm good, Mom." "How are you feeling?" she replied, trying to keep the conversation light. "I'm managing," her mother replied, but Rachel could hear the faint cough in her voice. "I'm tired, but your brother is handling it. He's been helping with the baby at least. I just want to make sure you're not overworking yourself." Rachel sighed inwardly. It was a routine conversation, and one she had almost every night. Her mother always worried about her, and Rachel hated to worry her further, but the truth was, she was barely scraping by. Still, she didn't want to burden her mother. "I'm okay, Mom." "Don't worry about me. How's Ethan?" Rachel asked, trying to change the subject to her younger brother. "Same old, just trying to make ends meet. His girlfriend's pregnant, and now they're talking about marriage, but they don't have the money for a wedding yet. I'm trying to save some for the baby's care," her mother replied with a sigh. Rachel's heart sank. She had promised to help her brother and family, but with the bills piling up and no extra income, it felt impossible. "I'll send more money soon, Mom." "I'll figure it out," she reassured her, though she wasn't sure how. "I don't want you working yourself to the bone, honey. Please remember to take care of yourself too." Her mother's voice trembled with concern. Rachel didn't respond right away. She didn't want to admit how overwhelmed she felt. "I'll be fine, Mom," she finally said, though the words felt hollow. "I'll call again soon. Take care of yourself." She hung up the phone, staring at the busy street ahead of her. The weight of her responsibilities pressed down on her shoulders. As much as she loved her family, the burden was wearing her down. She didn't know how much longer she could keep up the constant struggle. The next day, Rachel was assigned to a new patient, Mr. Hamilton. The name didn't ring any bells, but the other nurses at the hospital had a certain apprehension about him. Mr. Hamilton was a billionaire, and while wealth often brought privilege, it also brought disdain. He was known for his short temper and his demanding, sometimes cruel behavior toward staff. Every nurse who had cared for him previously came away with stories of his harsh words and unreasonable expectations. Yet, when Rachel was assigned to him, she couldn't afford to be afraid. She needed this job, and she needed to prove herself. When she first entered his room, she was immediately struck by the opulence surrounding him. The hospital room was more like a luxury suite than a place for medical care. Mr. Hamilton lay in bed, his sharp features softened only by the pale skin that marked his illness. He looked at her with piercing eyes, his expression unreadable. "You must be the nurse assigned to me," he said curtly, his voice deep and authoritative. "I hope you're more competent than the others." Rachel stood her ground, offering him a polite smile. "I'm here to take care of you, Mr. Hamilton. Let me know if you need anything." To her surprise, he didn't bark back or give her a hard time. Instead, he settled into a cold silence as if studying her. After a few moments, he spoke again. "I need a favor," he said, his voice quieter but still commanding. "I want you to pretend to be my daughter, just for one day." Rachel blinked in confusion. "Your daughter, sir?" she repeated, unsure if she had heard him correctly. Mr. Hamilton's eyes softened just a fraction. "Yes, just for one day. I want to experience what it's like to be a father again. Pretend to be my daughter for a day, and I'll make sure you're well compensated." Rachel stood frozen for a moment, processing what he had just said. This was beyond anything she had expected. She had never been asked for such a strange favor. But her mind raced. Could this be an opportunity? An opportunity to make extra money, perhaps? After all, she could use every penny she could get to help her struggling family. "I'm not sure. It's quite unusual," Rachel said, still unsure how to respond. "I'm not asking for much, just a day. One day to fulfill something that's been missing in my life," Mr. Hamilton insisted, his voice almost pleading, though he tried to hide it behind his usual stern tone. Rachel felt a pang of empathy. She had heard about the tragic loss of his daughter, and the thought of someone like him, so rich yet so lonely, struck her heart. Maybe this was the least she could do for him. "Okay," Rachel said hesitantly. "I'll do it." As Rachel agreed to Mr. Hamilton's request, she had no idea that this simple act of kindness would take her down a path she hadn't anticipated. Her life, which already seemed to be spiraling out of control, was about to change forever. She would discover more about Mr. Hamilton than she had ever expected, and in doing so, she would learn more about herself, her family, and what truly mattered in life. This one day would alter the course of Rachel's journey, bringing both unexpected rewards and painful lessons. And it all began with a dying billionaire's final request. After Mr. Hamilton's request, Rachel found herself caught in a moral dilemma. She had never agreed to something like this before. To pretend to be his daughter for just one day? It felt so out of the ordinary. But at the same time, it was his last wish, a final act to make peace with his past. He was a man who had everything money could buy, but lacked the simple joy of family. As Rachel entered Mr. Hamilton's room the next morning, she saw a man who appeared more vulnerable than usual. His rough exterior, usually filled with arrogance and dominance, was replaced by a fragile, almost childlike demeanor. "Are you ready?" Rachel asked, trying to keep her voice steady as she approached him, feeling both empathy and discomfort. Mr. Hamilton, in a weak but grateful tone, nodded. "Yes, I've waited a long time for this day." Rachel smiled politely, but couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She knew she had agreed to this to help him, and maybe to help herself financially. But as she prepared to take on this unusual role, she started to feel the weight of the request. They left the sterile clinical confines of the hospital and ventured into the world beyond. Rachel, as his daughter, was tasked with showing him the things he had once loved. Their first stop was a park, a place filled with memories of his late daughter. He hadn't been there in years, and the sight of the park brought both joy and sadness to his eyes. "This is where we used to come," Mr. Hamilton whispered, watching the children run by, their laughter echoing through the air. "She loved the paper boats. I used to watch her send them down the river." Rachel sat silently beside him, her heart heavy with his unspoken sorrow. She could tell he had wanted to relive these moments, but time had moved on, and his daughter was no longer there. She sat next to him, offering a quiet, comforting presence. She was no longer just playing a role. She was, in a way, trying to fill the void left by his loss. As they continued their day, visiting places of significance from his past, an ice cream shop, a bookstore, Rachel started to notice the small changes in Mr. Hamilton. His usual gruffness was replaced by quiet reflection, and moments of humor began to surface. For the first time, Rachel saw a side of him that wasn't just about wealth or power. "Thank you for this," he said as they sat together in a bookstore. I haven't felt this alive in years. Rachel, still hesitant to fully let her guard down, responded with a soft smile. You're welcome, Dad. It felt strange to call him Dad, but in that moment, it didn't feel as forced as she had expected. She could sense the sincerity in his words, and a part of her began to empathize with him more deeply. At the ice cream parlor, Rachel could see the weight of the years on Mr. Hamilton's face. The small act of sharing ice cream, something so simple, seemed to lift his spirits more than anything else had. They sat by the window, watching the world go by. I've missed this, he said, his voice tinged with regret. Not just the ice cream, but having someone to share these moments with. I lost that long ago. Rachel had heard the sadness in his voice, and for the first time she allowed herself to feel what he was going through. She understood. She, too, had lost someone close to her, her father. The bond they shared over their shared grief became more apparent, and she felt herself growing closer to Mr. Hamilton in a way she hadn't anticipated. As the day wore on, their connection deepened. Rachel was no longer just fulfilling his request. She was becoming someone he could rely on, someone who understood him. Mr. Hamilton had been a man of wealth and stature, but today he was simply a man who had experienced loss, regret, and pain. And in Rachel, he had found a temporary respite from that pain. On their way back to the hospital, Mr. Hamilton opened up in a way he hadn't before. He shared memories of his daughter and the regret he carried for not being there for her when she needed him most. It was a vulnerable side of him that Rachel had never expected to see. I wasn't there for her, he admitted, his voice trembling. And now I have no one left. I've lived a life of success, but without love, without family. It means nothing. Rachel couldn't hold back her sympathy. You're not alone, she said softly. You have me. Mr. Hamilton looked at her, his expression softening. Thank you for being here. By the time they arrived back at the hospital, the day had felt too short. Rachel had played the role of a daughter, and Mr. Hamilton had embraced it in a way she hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the act. It was about the emotions that surfaced, the vulnerability, the grief, and, for a fleeting moment, a sense of peace. As Rachel entered Mr. Hamilton's room and helped him settle back into bed, she felt a heaviness in her chest. She had done what he had asked, but she couldn't ignore the emotional impact of the day. The line between nurse and daughter had blurred, and she realized that for both of them, this day had meant more than just fulfilling a last request. I'll see you tomorrow, Dad, Rachel whispered, as she tucked him in for the night. Thank you, Rachel, Mr. Hamilton replied, his voice full of gratitude. As she stepped out of the room, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this day had changed something inside her. She had come into this agreement to help him, but somewhere along the way she had allowed herself to care for him as well. After several days of tending to Mr. Hamilton's needs, Rachel thought she had a good understanding of the wealthy, irritable man. But nothing could have prepared her for what he asked of her on that particular day, an unusual, almost surreal request. It started like any other day. Rachel had arrived at the hospital early, already mentally preparing herself for the exhaustion that would follow the long shifts. Mr. Hamilton's room was quiet, as usual, and his physical condition had only worsened over the last few days. The cold, sterile environment of the hospital felt more like a prison than a place of healing. As Rachel walked into his room, the curtains were drawn back, letting a sliver of light creep across the room. She moved toward his bedside and adjusted the IV drip, her heart heavy with the familiar weight of his silent suffering. "Morning, Rachel," Mr. Hamilton said, his voice raspy from days of disuse. He had become more communicative recently, but his tone was always somber, tinged with the bitterness of his situation. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton," Rachel replied, her voice soft as she adjusted the sheets around him. There was something in his eyes today, a depth that had not been there before. Mr. Hamilton had become more distant, almost as though he were lost in his own thoughts. He stared out the window for a long time, seemingly oblivious to Rachel's presence. When he finally spoke, his words were not the usual grumbles or complaints. "Rachel," he began, his voice steady but filled with a strange mix of sadness and resolve. "I need you to do something for me, something that has been weighing on my mind for a while now." Rachel paused, sensing the gravity in his words. She had seen him at his worst, grumpy, demanding, and difficult to deal with. But this was different. This was a man who was staring down his final days, desperate for something more than just medical care. He wanted a connection. He wanted to reclaim a piece of his lost humanity. "What is it, Mr. Hamilton?" she asked, trying to mask the concern in her voice. Mr. Hamilton turned to face her, his eyes tired but intent. "I want you to pretend to be my daughter. For just one day. I don't have much time left, Rachel. I've lived a life filled with wealth, power, and achievements. But there's one thing I've missed. Someone to call me Dad, to show me that I matter. I've never asked anyone for anything, but I'm asking you now." Rachel was stunned. Her mind raced, trying to process the words that were coming from him. For a moment, she couldn't speak. The request was so far outside the realm of her professional duties as a nurse that she didn't know how to respond. "Mr. Hamilton," she stammered, unsure of how to proceed. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he interjected gently, his gaze softening. "I know this is a strange request, but I have no one else. And for just one day, I want to feel like a father again. I want to feel that warmth. I want to do something I haven't done in years. Take my daughter to the park, buy her flowers, have a simple day out like any other father would." Rachel's heart tightened. She could see the desperation in his eyes, the same kind of desperation she had seen in her own mother's eyes when she had no one to turn to. For a moment, Rachel thought about saying no, about refusing the request, but she couldn't. She had seen the pain in Mr. Hamilton's eyes over the past few days, and now she understood. This wasn't just about a dying man's last wish. It was about a man who had spent his entire life alone, consumed by his business, missing out on what truly mattered: love, family, connection. "I'll do it," Rachel said, her voice filled with quiet determination. "I'll be your daughter for one day." A wave of relief washed over Mr. Hamilton's face, and for the first time in a long while he smiled. A genuine smile, not the forced, bitter grin he often wore. "Thank you, Rachel," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel walked slowly through the sterile hospital halls, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing in the background as her mind raced. She had agreed to Mr. Hamilton's request, something that felt so surreal that she still couldn't fully grasp the weight of it. A part of her wondered if she had made a mistake. What kind of nurse pretended to be someone's daughter? It felt wrong, and yet it felt necessary too. As she approached his room, she paused for a moment, gathering her composure. It wasn't like she could turn back now. This was his final request, and she was about to fulfill it. Mr. Hamilton's room was quiet when she entered, the sound of the ventilator and the faint clicking of the IV drip being the only noise. He looked smaller than he had the day before, frail, almost fragile. His skin seemed to hang loosely on his bones, and his eyes, usually sharp and calculating, now looked tired and resigned. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton," Rachel said softly, stepping into the room and drawing the curtains slightly to let in some sunlight. She had brought fresh flowers with her, bright yellow daisies, his favorite, or so she remembered from their earlier conversations. She placed them on the small bedside table, trying to ignore the weight of his gaze on her. He glanced up at her, his lips curving into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. "You came," he murmured, his voice hoarse from the days of not speaking much. Rachel nodded and set about checking his vitals, making sure everything was in place for his comfort. She wasn't sure what he wanted, what he expected from this daughter act. Would she be expected to treat him like a parent? How was she supposed to fill a role she didn't even understand? "Rachel," he spoke again, and his voice was tinged with emotion. "You know, I never had the chance to be a good father. I was always so focused on work, on building my empire. I pushed away the people who mattered the most." Rachel glanced up at him, her hands pausing in their work. She hadn't expected this conversation, but it made sense. There was a deep sadness in his eyes, and for the first time, she saw vulnerability instead of the hard businessman who had once seemed so untouchable. The realization struck her then. This was his chance to be the father he never was. And she was the one who had to help him, to let him feel what it was like to be loved in a way he had never experienced. "I'm sorry," Mr. Hamilton continued, his voice trembling. "I wanted to give her everything, but I couldn't give her my time. My work consumed me, and now I'm alone." Rachel's heart tightened in her chest. She could feel the emotion swelling inside him, a wave of regret and sorrow so heavy that it almost choked him. She didn't know how to respond. She had no experience with this kind of grief, and certainly no experience in pretending to be someone's daughter. But she knew deep down that the only thing she could give him in this moment was compassion. It was all she could offer. "I understand," Rachel said, her voice soft but steady. She moved closer to his bedside and took his hand gently in hers, offering the warmth of her touch. "It's never too late to make things right, Mr. Hamilton. You've made the first step by wanting to share this time with someone." He nodded, his eyes welling with tears. "I should have done better. I should have been there for her, for my wife. But now I'm just an old man, clinging to the past." Rachel swallowed hard, fighting back her own tears. She wasn't sure what to say next. She couldn't change the past for him, but she could be here now. She could listen. She could offer him the kind of connection he had been searching for his whole life. She could give him this day, and that was all she could do. "Mr. Hamilton," she said quietly, taking a deep breath, "you've made it through so much already. No one expects you to be perfect. The most important thing is that you're here now, and for today, I'm here for you." His eyes softened and a shaky breath escaped his lips. "Thank you, Rachel. You don't know how much this means to me." In that moment, Rachel realized just how much of a shift this day had caused. What had started as an act of duty, pretending to be his daughter, was now an act of healing for both of them. She wasn't just pretending anymore. She was connecting with him, understanding the hurt that lay deep within him, and offering the comfort that had been missing from his life for so long. After a few moments of silence, Rachel leaned in, adjusting the pillows behind him to make him more comfortable. As she did, she felt a shift in the atmosphere. Something unspoken passed between them, a realization that this day, this moment, was more than just a request. It was a chance for both of them to find healing in their own ways. But the weight of what was to come still loomed in the air. Rachel knew she couldn't stay in this role forever. She couldn't be his daughter forever. The end was coming for him, and she could feel the finality of it hanging over them both. Yet for this one day, she would be the daughter he never had, and for her, it would be the final act of kindness that she could offer him. As the day went on, they took small steps together, walking through the hospital garden, having tea in the small dining area, and talking about things neither of them had shared before. In his eyes, Rachel could see the joy that was returning, slowly but surely. He laughed more, his voice lighter, and for a moment, she could almost imagine him as the man he once was, a father, a husband, a person who had loved deeply and given generously. But in the quiet moments, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that this day was slipping away far too quickly. She knew what it meant. She had agreed to give him one last day, but she hadn't anticipated how much this would affect her. She wasn't just playing a role. She had become a part of his story, and in doing so, she had become a part of her own story too. By the time the evening came, and she returned him to his room, Rachel was emotionally drained. She had laughed with him, shared in his memories, and even cried a little as he spoke about his regrets. She felt connected to him in a way she hadn't expected. She had given him what he needed, but in doing so, she had given herself something too. As she helped him back into his bed, she smoothed the sheets over him, and for a brief moment, she allowed herself to feel the depth of what had transpired. She had been the daughter he had always longed for, and he had been the father she never had. "I'll be back tomorrow," Rachel whispered softly, squeezing his hand once more. "Rest well, Mr. Hamilton." He smiled faintly. "Thank you, Rachel. I'll be okay." But even as she left the room, the fear lingered in her chest. She knew the day would come when she would lose him, but for now, she had given him the gift of family, of love, of connection, and that in itself was a kind of miracle. The morning sun streamed gently through the hospital windows, casting long golden rays across the sterile white walls. Rachel woke up feeling a sense of dread that had lingered for hours. The events of the previous day had felt like a dream, and yet the reality of Mr. Hamilton's deteriorating condition was all too real. She had been his daughter for a day, and the bond they had shared was something she would never forget. But today was different. Today was the day he had asked for, the final wish he had requested. Her heart weighed heavily as she slipped into her uniform and gathered her things. She had spent a restless night trying to shake the emotional impact of the previous evening. She couldn't stop thinking about him, the man who had once been cold and distant, now looking to her for something he had never been able to find in his wealth: love, connection, and a sense of family. Today, he was going to experience something he had longed for, and Rachel couldn't help but feel that she was a part of it in a way that was far deeper than just fulfilling a request. She had become part of his journey, and it would be a part of her own too. Arriving at the hospital, she was met with the usual bustle of the early morning shift. Nurses rushed by, equipment clattered, and the air was thick with the urgency of care. But Rachel could barely focus on anything other than Mr. Hamilton's room. She knew he was waiting for her, waiting for the day to unfold just as he had dreamed it. She couldn't help but wonder how it would go. Would it bring him peace? Or would it deepen the pain of what he had lost? As she entered his room, she found him sitting up in bed, his gaze fixed out the window, lost in thought. The small garden outside was quiet, a few patients walking slowly with family members, their steps deliberate and slow. Mr. Hamilton's frailty was more evident today, the slight tremor in his hands more pronounced, the pain on his face no longer easily hidden. "Good morning, Mr. Hamilton," Rachel said softly, walking up to his side. She set down her bag and the small bouquet of flowers she had brought for him. Today's flowers were delicate white lilies, their fragrance gentle and calming. She hoped they would soothe him in the same way his memories had soothed her. He turned slowly to look at her, his face lighting up with the faintest smile. "Good morning, Rachel," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Are you ready for our day?" Rachel nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "I'm ready, sir. I'm here for you." For the next several hours they did exactly as Mr. Hamilton had envisioned. They left the hospital together, the air cool and crisp as they were driven through the city. The ride was quiet, with only the soft hum of the car's engine filling the space between them. Rachel could feel the weight of the moment, the significance of what they were doing. This wasn't just a request. It was his way of reclaiming a part of himself that he had lost. And for Rachel, it was a rare gift, a chance to witness someone rediscover what mattered most in life. Their first stop was a quiet park by a river, a place Mr. Hamilton had often visited with his daughter. As they walked together, Rachel could see the memories unfolding before his eyes. He had told her about their picnics, the way his daughter would float paper boats down the river, and how simple moments like that had once filled his life with joy. They walked along the water's edge, taking slow steps as Mr. Hamilton pointed to places where he had once shared laughter with his daughter. "You know," he said, his voice soft but filled with nostalgia, "I never realized how much I missed moments like this until now. I thought my business was everything. But when I look at this river, I realize how much I've missed, how much I've neglected." Rachel glanced at him, her heart aching for the regret that was so evident in his eyes. "You did the best you could, Mr. Hamilton, and you're still here now with us. That's what matters." They spent another hour in the park, walking quietly, enjoying the peace that seemed to envelop them. Rachel had long since abandoned any pretenses of being just a nurse. She wasn't playing a role anymore. She was truly connecting with him, and he with her. This was the father-daughter bond he had longed for, even if it was only for a brief moment in time. After the park, they made their way to an ice cream parlor. Rachel could see the joy in Mr. Hamilton's eyes as they walked through the door, the memory of taking his daughter here all those years ago vividly resurfacing. He ordered 2 scoops of vanilla and chocolate, the flavors his daughter had always preferred. They sat by the window, watching the world go by, their ice cream melting slowly as they shared stories. Mr. Hamilton laughed more than he had in days, a genuine sound that came from deep within him. As the day went on, they visited a bookstore, where Mr. Hamilton insisted on buying Rachel a book. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than anything to her. She had never had a father to spoil her, and yet here she was, accepting the gift with gratitude. He had given her the gift of family for one day, and she would cherish it forever. By the time they reached the mall, Rachel could see that Mr. Hamilton was tiring. His breathing had become shallow, and his movements slower. But still, he insisted on going through the clothing store, choosing clothes for Rachel to try on. She hesitated at first, but then she understood. He wasn't just buying her clothes. He was giving her something precious, the opportunity to experience a moment of fatherly love. When the day came to an end, and they returned to the hospital, Rachel felt a deep sadness settle over her. She had given him a day that he would remember, a day that had brought him joy in the midst of his pain. But she knew it was only a temporary escape. As she helped him back into his room, she wished she could have given him more time. More days, more moments of happiness. "Thank you, Rachel," he said, his voice soft as she helped him into bed. "This day, it's more than I ever expected. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever. I'll never forget it." Rachel's heart clenched in her chest as she whispered, "You don't have to thank me, Mr. Hamilton. I'm just glad I could be here for you." She sat beside him for a moment, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. She knew what was coming. She knew he wouldn't be here much longer, but for now, for this one perfect day, they had shared something far more valuable than wealth or status. They had shared a bond of love, a bond that transcended blood and time. As she stood to leave, she kissed him on the forehead, a quiet gesture of affection that she knew he needed more than anything else in the world. "Good night, Mr. Hamilton," she said softly. "Rest well." He smiled at her, his eyes full of gratitude. "Good night, Rachel. Thank you for being my daughter, even if just for a day." And as she closed the door behind her, Rachel knew that she had given him everything he had asked for, and in return, she had received something that would stay with her forever. The next morning, Rachel arrived at the hospital, still carrying the weight of the previous day with her. Her mind replayed each moment, each smile, each laugh shared with Mr. Hamilton, and she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss already. She had grown close to him in a way she never anticipated, and the bond they had shared, even for a brief moment, felt like a treasure she would keep forever. But a part of her had known it was only a fleeting moment in time. A moment he had longed for, but a moment that would soon be over. As she stepped through the hospital's sterile corridors, Rachel's heart sank at the thought of him. She had watched his frailty grow over the past few days, and today, she had an awful sense that it would be the day she would lose him. Despite the small smiles he had given her, despite the peace he seemed to have found in those final moments, Rachel knew time was running out. The hospital was quieter than usual as she walked toward his room. The bustling energy of the medical staff was replaced with a somber calm, and Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. She entered the room quietly, only to find the nurses gathered around his bed. Their hushed voices were barely audible, but the sight of the machines around Mr. Hamilton's bed, beeping irregularly, told her everything she needed to know. Her heart dropped. "Is he?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling as she stepped forward, her hands shaking. A nurse looked up, her expression grave. "We've been trying to stabilize him, but he's not responding. His heart, it's giving out." Rachel felt as if the world had stopped spinning. For a moment, everything around her blurred, and all she could hear was the pounding of her own heart. She had known this was coming. She had even tried to prepare herself for it, but nothing could have prepared her for the overwhelming rush of grief that surged through her. She rushed to Mr. Hamilton's side, her breath caught in her throat. His face was pale, and his breathing was shallow. She could see the struggle in his chest, the rise and fall of his ribs, and the look of exhaustion in his eyes. But even now there was a small flicker of recognition when he saw her. "Mr. Hamilton," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mr. Hamilton, can you hear me?" He turned his head slightly, his eyes meeting hers. There was no anger in them anymore, just the deep sadness of a man who had lived a life full of regrets and missed opportunities. But there was also something else. There was peace. And in that moment, Rachel realized something profound. This man, who had once been so bitter, so cold, had found a sense of peace in his final days, thanks to her. "Rachel," his voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Thank you." Her chest tightened as she took his hand. "Don't say that. I'm so glad I could be there for you. You gave me something I didn't even know I needed." Mr. Hamilton smiled faintly, a smile that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. "You gave me my daughter, even if just for one day." Tears filled Rachel's eyes as she held his hand, not knowing what else to say. She wasn't prepared for this goodbye. Not like this. They had just shared a perfect day together, a day that had meant so much to both of them, and now it felt like it had been snatched away in an instant. She didn't want to let go. She didn't want to lose him, not after everything they had shared. But as the minutes passed, the beeping of the machines grew weaker, and Rachel knew deep down that his time had come. "I'll never forget you, Mr. Hamilton," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. "You've changed my life, too." His breathing grew even more shallow, and Rachel could feel the heaviness in the room. She leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. "You're not alone, Mr. Hamilton. You're not alone anymore." With that, she felt a small squeeze of his hand, and then, just as quickly, the grip loosened. His breathing stilled, and the machines fell silent. Rachel stayed there, her face pressed against his hand, for what felt like an eternity. She couldn't bring herself to move, to say goodbye. The reality of the moment was too much. She had known Mr. Hamilton for such a short time, but in that time, he had become more than just a patient to her. He had become a part of her story, a reminder of the power of human connection and the love that can transcend even the most difficult of circumstances. The nurses quietly moved in, offering her space to grieve. But Rachel didn't need space. She needed to be there, to honor the man who had given her the gift of one perfect day, and to remember the bond they had shared. Later that afternoon, Rachel found herself standing in the quiet of the hospital hallway, the weight of the loss heavy on her shoulders. She had just said goodbye to a man who had left an indelible mark on her heart, and yet, in the midst of her grief, she couldn't shake the feeling that he had been given something in return, too. Not just a moment of joy, but a new perspective on life, a sense of peace that he had never known before. As Rachel made her way to the staff room, she saw Emily waiting for her. Her best friend looked at her with a mixture of concern and sympathy. Emily knew. She knew what Rachel had lost, and without saying a word, she wrapped her arms around her in a tight hug. "I'm so sorry, Rachel," Emily whispered, her voice full of empathy. "I know how much he meant to you." Rachel didn't have the strength to respond. She just held on tightly to Emily, letting the tears fall freely. She wasn't sure how to move on from this, how to handle the pain of losing someone who had meant so much in such a short time. But she knew one thing for sure. Mr. Hamilton's impact on her life would never fade. The lessons he had taught her, the love he had shown her, would stay with her forever. Rachel attended Mr. Hamilton's funeral a few days later. It was a small, quiet ceremony, attended only by a few of his old friends and some of his employees. She hadn't expected to be there, but in a way, it felt right. She stood by his grave, the weight of the moment pressing down on her as the coffin was lowered into the ground. She closed her eyes, offering a prayer in her heart, not just for him, but for herself, for the family she had lost, for the struggles she had faced, and for the love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of places. Rachel left the cemetery that day with a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She had lost someone, yes, but she had gained something too. A new understanding of what it meant to live, to love, and to be there for someone, even in their darkest hour. As she continued her work at the hospital, Rachel found herself thinking about Mr. Hamilton often. But she also realized that her life was moving forward. She was still supporting her family, still fighting for a better future, and still giving everything she had to her patients. But now, she carried with her the memory of a day that had changed everything. The day when a dying billionaire had asked her to pretend to be his daughter, and in doing so, had given her a gift that no amount of money could ever buy, the gift of love, connection, and family. And she would cherish that gift for the rest of her life. In the weeks that followed Mr. Hamilton's passing, Rachel's life seemed to go back to the routine she knew so well. But in truth, everything had changed. The hospital's bustling halls, the constant phone calls from her family, the exhaustion of working long hours, it all felt different now. The shadow of Mr. Hamilton's death loomed over her, but in the quiet moments, she could still feel the lessons he had left her. The lessons about kindness, forgiveness, and the importance of looking beyond the surface of things. One day, as Rachel was preparing for her shift, she received a call that would alter the course of her life forever. It was from the law office of Robert Sandal, a man she had never met. He informed her that Mr. Hamilton had left her a substantial inheritance in his will. Rachel's first reaction was disbelief. It couldn't be real. She had just lost a man she had barely known, and now he was leaving her something more than she could have ever imagined. The attorney explained that the will had been executed just a few days before Mr. Hamilton's passing, and Rachel was to receive a share of his estate, including a beautiful farmhouse in Montana, a vacation house in Colorado, and a sum of money that would ensure her family would never struggle again. Rachel felt numb as she listened. She had never expected anything like this. She was just a nurse, a woman trying to get by and support her family. She had never dreamed that someone like Mr. Hamilton, A man with a life so full of wealth and regrets would leave her anything. Especially not something so life-changing. But the lawyer's words were clear, and the legal documents he sent over confirmed it. Rachel was the beneficiary. She had been included in his final wishes, and now she had to decide what to do with it all. As the days passed, Rachel found herself lost in thought. She had always lived modestly, keeping her head down and working hard to make ends meet. The idea of suddenly having money, a house, a future that didn't involve constant worry, it was almost too much to grasp. Her family's needs were overwhelming, but this new wealth brought with it a series of new challenges. She couldn't just take the money and leave her old life behind. There were too many responsibilities, too many people depending on her, and despite the financial windfall, she still felt the same sense of duty, the same need to work hard and provide. It was what had kept her going through every hardship, every sleepless night. But now, with the weight of Mr. Hamilton's legacy on her shoulders, she knew she couldn't ignore the opportunities before her. She had to make a decision, one that would impact not just her life, but the lives of those she loved. One afternoon, after her shift, Rachel sat down with Emily in the hospital cafeteria, the quiet buzz of voices around them providing a gentle backdrop to their conversation. "Emily," Rachel said, her voice soft, "you won't believe what happened." Emily looked up from her lunch, her eyes full of curiosity. "What's going on, Ra?" I've been given an inheritance from Mr. Hamilton," Rachel said, shaking her head in disbelief. "A house in Montana, a vacation home in Colorado, and a sum of money. It's more than I ever could have imagined." Emily's jaw dropped. "Are you serious, Rachel? That's incredible, but how? Why you?" Rachel shrugged, feeling a mix of gratitude and guilt. "I don't know, Emily. He left it to me in his will. I think he just wanted to thank me for being there for him. But now, I don't know what to do with it all." "Rachel, this is life-changing," Emily said, her voice full of excitement. "This is everything you've worked for, everything you've sacrificed. It's a chance to finally have the life you deserve." "I don't know if I deserve it, though," Rachel replied, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not used to things coming so easily. I've always had to fight for everything." Emily reached across the table, placing her hand on Rachel's. "You deserve this, Ra. You've given so much of yourself to your family, to your patients. This is your chance to take care of yourself, too." Rachel looked at her best friend, the woman who had been by her side through everything. She felt a tear slide down her cheek, a mixture of joy and sadness that was too much to bear. "I don't know what to do, Emily," she confessed. "I want to use this money to help my family, to give them a better life. But I also know I need to do something for myself." Emily smiled softly. "Start small. Take a deep breath. You've already done so much for everyone else. Now it's your turn." Over the next few weeks, Rachel took the time to think carefully about her next steps. She visited the properties Mr. Hamilton had left her, standing in the empty house in Montana and gazing at the sprawling landscape outside. She could imagine her family living there, her mother, her siblings, and even Emily, all together in a space where they could finally breathe, where they could start anew. But there was also the vacation home in Colorado, a place that could offer her the escape she had longed for, a place to recharge and reflect. It was tempting, this idea of taking a break from it all, of leaving behind the demands of the hospital, the constant worry about her family's financial security. After a long period of reflection, Rachel made a decision. She would move her family into the Montana house. She would give them the peace and comfort they had never had, a home they could truly call their own. And she would take some time for herself, to travel, to experience life outside of the hospital's walls, to finally find a balance between taking care of others and caring for herself, But there was more. Rachel knew she wanted to do something lasting with the money Mr. Hamilton had left her. She wanted to honor his memory, not just by living a better life, but by helping others. She began researching ways to use her newfound wealth to support medical causes, to fund scholarships for nurses who wanted to specialize in palliative care, just like she had. She wanted to ensure that Mr. Hamilton's legacy lived on through the lives of others, through the lives of those who needed help, just as he had. Months later, Rachel stood outside the hospital, the wind gently tugging at her coat. She had made her decision. She was going to take a sabbatical, spend time with her family in Montana, and focus on her personal growth. But she also knew that the work she had started, the legacy of kindness and empathy that Mr. Hamilton had shown her, would continue. She would keep giving back to the world, just as he had. She had learned a powerful lesson from him. The true meaning of life was not found in wealth or success, but in the connections we make with others. And in that sense, Rachel had already received the greatest gift of all, a family, a sense of belonging, and the knowledge that no matter what, she was never truly alone. As she looked out at the mountains in the distance, Rachel smiled, knowing that she was finally on the path to a new beginning. The end of one chapter had led to the start of another, and this time, Rachel was ready to embrace it fully. As Rachel stood at the edge of the grave, tears streaming down her face, she finally allowed herself to mourn. But this time, the grief was different. It wasn't just about Mr. Hamilton's passing. It was about the incredible journey she had gone on, the lessons she had learned, and the impact he had on her life. She had been given the chance to help someone at their lowest, and in doing so, she had found a sense of purpose, a renewed belief in the power of kindness and compassion. Rachel wiped her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling a sense of peace she had never known before. As she walked away from the cemetery, she realized that the true inheritance Mr. Hamilton had left her wasn't just material wealth. It was the gift of perspective, a reminder that life isn't about what we accumulate, but about how we love and care for the people around us. As she returned home, Rachel was ready to face a future full of possibilities. A new chapter had begun, and this time, it was hers to shape. She was no longer just a nurse, a daughter, or a sister. She was a woman who had faced her struggles, accepted her imperfections, and learned to love herself as much as she loved her family. Now, with a future full of hope and new opportunities ahead of her, Rachel was determined to make the most of it. She would continue her work, her mission to help others, but this time she would do it with a renewed sense of purpose and balance. And with that, Rachel's journey came full circle. So, what do you think about Rachel's journey? Do you think she made the right choice by accepting Mr. Hamilton's inheritance, or should she have rejected it? What would you have done if you were in Rachel's shoes? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories just like this one. We'd love to hear your opinions and feedback, and if you rated this story, let us know what you'd give it on a scale of 1 to 10. Your feedback means the world to us. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.